Hello, I'm Larry Wilson, and welcome to this segment in our study on the book of Daniel. I know that some of you are probably wondering, how is this the book of Daniel? For the last several segments, we've been examining all kinds of things that apparently, on the surface, many may think have no relationship to Daniel. But that's part of the problem with understanding the book. That was sealed up until the appointed time of the end. When we talk about the time of the end, we're talking about timing. Timing has a beginning, timing has an ending, and understanding timing is an important part of Bible prophecy. There are 18 prophetic time periods in the books of Daniel and Revelation, and timing is crucial to understand. There are many time periods in the past, there are several in the future, there are some that span both sides of where we currently are. So understanding these time periods and their timing is very important. And of course, as with in all things, if you want to get a proper understanding, you have to go back to the beginning. In our last segment, I was explaining how God set up some clocks to measure time. And I would like to continue, and I want to take you now to my little illustration and show you this little picture and try to explain a couple of things. Here's the sun, of course, and here's the earth. And you can see I've drawn a circle around the sun to represent our orbit around the sun. And the interesting thing about this little picture, you can see I have a picture of the earth in this position here at about 4 o'clock. And then you see I have another picture of Earth drawn at about the 10 o'clock position in this orbit around the sun. Now, I've just arbitrarily chosen these locations because what I've done here is to draw the equinoxes. There are 2 equinoxes per year. There's one in the spring, and that's the one here at the 4 o'clock position, and there's one in the fall, and that's at the 10 o'clock position in this illustration. The equinox occurs when we have the rotation and the alignment of the earth in such a way that we have the equal night with equal day. And in fact, the word equinox comes from Latin, which means equal night, equinox, or night. So twice a year we have some absolute positions with respect to just observing the function of our orbit around the sun. We have equal night with equal light. This year, 2004, the equinox occurs on March 20. Now, it's not always absolutely true that you have the same amount of light as night at the equinox, but it's very close. The equinox became a position, a fixed position for the heavenly bodies so that navigators through the ages could look at the stars and pretty well determine where they were in their location. So the equinox, the spring equinox and the fall equinox this year will happen on September 22. And as you might understand, the 1 year is a cycle or going around the sun. And the actual number of days that it takes to go around the sun and to come right back to the equinox is 365.242, just in round numbers. 365 and about a quarter of a day, about 6 hours. So 365 days and 6 hours it takes to make this complete trip. Now, you probably recall from the previous discussion segment that we were talking about the moon. It takes the moon 29 days and about 12 hours to make its trip around the earth. So the question is, why did Jesus set up time and timing in such a way that we have 365 and 6 hours? Why didn't he just make it an even number, 365 or 366 or 300? What about the moon? Why didn't he just make that 30 days even? Why didn't he just make it on an even number? Why did he deliberately, and that's the key word here, why did he deliberately do this? Well, we'll all get the chance to ask him someday. But I believe that there are some very profound reasons for this. Orbital mechanics is the answer, in short. By putting things at these precise locations, certain precise physical reactions and effects occur, and this is all part of the grand design that Jesus implemented when he created Earth, and he put us in this orbit on the 4th day. We're traveling around the sun at about 67,000 miles an hour. We are moving on. Our planet is spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour. So that at any given point on Earth, we get a complete rotation of 25,000 miles circumference in about 24 hours. So you can see we're doing a little better than 1,000 miles an hour land speed with respect to rotation on our own axis. This orbit around the sun is 587 million miles. Pretty big loop. And the ancients used to call, and remember now, we're looking at the orbit of the Earth around the sun because we know that that's what happens. But the ancients didn't know that. They thought Earth stood still and the sun went around us. They thought Earth was the center of the universe. And Copernicus, in the 16th century, cleared that all up and made everybody mad. I think he lost his church membership over that as well, when he said that he could prove that the sun stood still and we did the moving. Well, the point here is that when God set up this rotation period, he set it up in a deliberate fashion, and he has two great clocks. The ancients called one cycle of the moon a month, or a month. In fact, Native Americans, it's often heard, in movies where they talk about 3 moons, or 2 moons, or 2.5 moons. And the month was considered to be born in darkness, mature and wax into the full moon, and wane into darkness again. So this was 1 month, and this is 1 year. A year is a cycle of making one loop, one orbit around the sun. Now, how can you keep track of time with these fractional parts of the movement of the moon and the earth with respect to the sun? That's a good question. Our earth rotates on its axis in such a wonderful way that our earth actually makes a complete rotation in 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds. Then we have to over-rotate by 3 minutes and 56 seconds in order to get back to the position where we were. So that when we are at this location, that we have our clocks are synchronized. God's orbital mechanics here enable us and allow us to have a clock that is precisely 24 hours, because as we move from this position to this position, we have to rotate not only one complete rotation, but we have to over-rotate by 3 minutes and 56 seconds, or else your clocks would all be crazy. In fact, if you were standing on this position at the equinox, and if the Earth just rotated, made one complete rotation in 23 hours and 56 minutes and didn't over-rotate, and let's suppose you're standing here at 12 noon, by the time you get to the fall equinox, it'll be 12 midnight, but your watch would say 12 noon. So we have to constantly over-rotate every day in order to keep facing the sun at precisely the same direction. Well, I've made such a mess of this chart. Let me take you now to a new one to look at. Here is the sun in the center. Here is the moon way out here, and here is the earth. Now, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit now that you've seen the big picture. And I want you to notice that when God set up the measurement of time at creation, the ancients measured a month by the moon. And so they would wait for the full moon to start the month, and then month 2 would start at the next full moon. So let's take this year, for example. Let me zoom in just a little bit better. Let's just take this year, for example. The equinox is March 20 of this year, and the first new moon that occurs on or after the equinox would be New Year's Day, because you start the new month. So March 21, Sunday, March 21, 2004, would be the beginning of the first month of the year. And the Jews, after the Babylonian captivity, adopted many of the Babylonian names for the names of the month. And so you will see in the Bible the name Nisan, or Abib, for the first month of the year. This is the spring of the year. So when you have a new moon on or after the spring equinox, then you have New Year's Day. Now watch what happens. So we know that the moon orbits the earth in 29.5 days. So the next new moon is going to be April 19. That would be when month 2 would start in this illustration for 2004. Month 3 would start on April 19. Month 4 would start on June 17. Month 5, July 17. Month 6, August 16. September 14, October 14, November 12, December 12, January 10, and then February 8 would be the start of the 8th month. Okay, so far so good, but now we run into a problem. At the end of the month of the 12th month, which the Jews called Adar, at the end of the 12th moon, we have a problem. We still have about 10 days to go before we reach the equinox. Well, you can't start a new year before you reach the equinox, because if you don't start the year correctly, if you don't start it right, you won't put your crops in the ground at the right time. Every year you'll be planting your crops. And now let's see, did we plant the barley? Was that in November or was that July? Man has constantly struggled in a way to determine when crops should be planted. Well, the problem with counting by months is that 12 lunar months is 10 days short of a year. So here we have month 13 starting on March 10. And this is the way God set it up, and He had Israel of old to count the time. Let me show you here. Let me back this up just a little bit so that you can sort of get the idea of what goes on here. Hope you can see this on your television. There's a lot of detail on this little screen, but it's quite interesting to watch how God did this. When the 12 months have ended, we have covered a total of 354 days and some change. Okay? We have 10.88 days to go to reach the equinox. So the way it works out actually is that every third year there's a 13th month in the year. So in this case, in the year 2004, we're going to start our year, New Year's Day, let's suppose, using God's clocks, would be March 21. That's the new moon, the first new moon, on or after the spring equinox. March 21 is on a Sunday. So the first month of the year is going to be Nisan. The second month will be Iyar, and then Sivan, and then Tammuz, and then Ab, and Elul, and Tishri, and then Marcheshvan, and Keslev, and Tebeth, and Shebat, and Adar. Now, in the year when we have 13 months, 13 moons, we have Adar 2, or Viadar, as it was called, so that the new year, 2005, would start April 8, 2005. Because you can't start a new year until you have a new moon. The new moon is always the first day of the new month. So in God's calendar, now this is the part that's tricky. Please watch this. If you have, we know, for example, already, that one complete loop of the sun all the way around is 365 days. But our calendar is not just a solar calendar. It's a solar-lunar calendar. God's calendar involves the moon as well as the sun. And so New Year's Day starts with the first new moon on or after the spring equinox. In the year 2004, that would be March 21, Sunday. And then the year 2004 would actually have in it 13 moons, because you've already seen that we're 10 days short at the end of 12 moons. So we've got to finish out Adar 2, that is the 13th month, and then our New Year's Day for month 1 in 2005 would be April 8. Now, I know this is a little bit complicated, but here is the point. Please look at this statement. God's year has 355 days or 384 days, depending on the phases of the moon with respect to the equinox. God's year always begins in the spring. Passover, when God confirmed the synchrony of his calendar, he told Moses in Exodus 12, this is to be the first month of your year. Passover is in the spring of the year, and the New Year's Day is determined by the first new moon on or after the spring equinox. So God's year will sometimes have 355 days in it, and will sometimes have 384 days in it, depending on the phases of the moon with respect to the equinox. And this is how it happens. Now, take the year 2005, just mentally do this for a minute, and you can see that if we start the year 2005 and Nisan 1 is going to be the equivalent of our April 8, then after 12 moons, we go make the circle again and we come back around, and so the end of the 12th moon is going to be March 29, 2006. It'll be 10 days less. So with the March 29 date, then we'll see that the year 2005 actually had 12 lunar moons in it and did not require the 13th. This 13th month only occurs once every 3 years. And although it is not precisely correcting, it's very close. It is true that every 19 years, the sun and the moon and the earth all line back up with so closely that the difference is only about 2 hours. Now you may say, why on earth did God create such a complicated calendar? Why did he give the ancients such a difficult time for measuring time itself? Well, actually, it's not as complicated as you might think. It's just complicated to us because we're not familiar with it. In ancient times, the ancients would simply look at the moon and tell what day of the month it was. They kept very accurate records. They had to measure time. And the reason that God perhaps made it complicated is so that people would keep track of time. God wanted those who would live at the end of time to know they were at the end of time. Now, you say, well, Larry, what does this have to do with the book of Daniel? Well, it has a lot to do with the book of Daniel, in fact. Because God's clock for the year can be both a 355-day year and a 384-day year, depending on the lunar cycles, the ancients came to regard one cycle of the sun as 360 degrees. In other words, the sun would return to the equinox at 360 degrees. And this was calculated as one time the sun went around the earth. One time. And so for purposes of calculating time, 360 degrees became 360 days. Does that make sense to you? The reason that should make sense to you, I want you to look at this chart here. Let me set this up for you. Now we'll go back to Daniel, and let's look at this for a second. Here in Daniel 7, we have the lion, the bear, the leopard, the monster. Now you recall how that Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are parallel prophecies, and the ram and the goat in Daniel 8 represent the Medo-Persian Empire, just like the bear did and just like the chest of silver does. In other words, God gives us repetition and enlargement. So in the Daniel 7 prophecy, the kingdom of Babylon is represented as a lion, and the bear, and the leopard, and then the monster. And you recall that the 10 horns of the monster would break its power, and out of the 10 horns, an 8th horn would come up, a little horn. And it would pluck up 3, so that would leave 7, and it itself would be the 8th horn, and it would persecute God's people for a time, times, and half a time. I hope you can understand. Now that you know that, you should perhaps be able to understand why a time is 360 days. Because one time of the sun around was 360 degrees. God's clock measuring the year was sometimes 355, sometimes 384, depending on the lunar cycles. So for purposes of calculation and for counting time, it actually comes out to be a time is 360 days. Now, because this time period of the 8th horn is operating within the Jubilee calendar, and in the Jubilee calendar, a day represents a year. This brown background on this chart shows the duration of the Jubilee calendar, which ended in 1994. I'll demonstrate this in our next segment. What I'm trying to show you is that the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 are a day for a year, because in the Jubilee calendar, a day represents a year. The 70th week, Messiah is cut off in the middle of the 70th week, right on time. I'm going to demonstrate that Jesus died precisely right on time, according to the prophecy. I'm going to show you that the time times in half a time of the little horn power. It is to be interpreted as 1,260 years. And precisely at the end, right on time, things occurred just as Bible prophecy has predicted. With God, timing is everything. But you've got to understand how time operates in order to appreciate what it's all about. Okay, I want to take you now to a little different investigation, and I want you to begin thinking about a couple of things. We have just a couple of minutes left in this segment, and we will start now, but we'll complete this investigation in our next segment. When God created the earth, the Bible says He did so in 7 days. And, for me, that's just a non-negotiable point, because the Bible, it doesn't make any hesitation in saying, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the 7th day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the 7th day, which is like the other days of the week in length, He rested from all His work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy. Only 1 day in the week has been made holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. I want to show you real quick here that we have a template of the weekly cycle that began at creation. And God made the 7th day holy. And later on in time, later on after creation, God is going to use the 7th day as a template, the Sabbath of the 7th day of the week as a template. And I'll explain more about that in our next segment. Well, we're out of time already. Where does time go when you're in studying God's Word? I know at first this will be a little bit overwhelming, but I want you to begin to see that God has a very deliberate reason for doing the things that He's done. And He ties them all together in Bible prophecy in the most amazing and the most exciting way. And I hope that this is encouraging to you to consider that with God, timing is everything. We'll see you soon.